Work in progress. Alrighty. What's going on, everybody? Let's just try this again. Ready. You're live. Alrighty. Okay, we are back. Sorry about that little pause for the cause there, but we should have everything good where it is now, I would think, hopefully. I finally got my TV, so I'm happy about that. So now we can actually do this now. I kind of figured that something like that was going to happen, where it was going to interfere in my I've been waiting all day, and Aaron sales leaders, and they freaking sent a guy with a van, but it's not like a van, like a Aaron's van. It's a different van, and it's like, what the hell, you know? It's just like a guy driving his van, his personal van. He would have been here sooner, but he got lost. His uh freaking GPS brought him to Red Lake Falls instead of over here to Brooks. So I'm just like, wow, can't believe that would even happen. Like, you could have called, but whatever. So sorry for the little delay. I did send our guest Stephen a new front or a live request, so hopefully sure he should have that now. Email link has been sent. Do, 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 do. And we'll get this going. Because I'm really curious about Steven. He seems like a really cool, fun person and awfully busy, I'm sure, but should be a good time. Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do. Oh, I tell you. It's so. Oh, yes, this stuff. How's it out here? Huh? Crazy adventures. Moving things. Make sure it's all good, for being a brand new TV. Oh. Boop, 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 boop. Excuse me. Alrighty. Are we ready to rock and roll, everybody? Show of hands who's all ready. Yeah, last time he told me he sent me, told me to send it to his email, and he never sent me his email. But but he did now, so or an hour ago. Oh goodness. Oh, 7 o'clock. Here we go. The new link has been sent. Boop, 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 boop. Oh, just waiting, waiting, waiting. Oh, it's only you. I told you. Yeah, I was just waiting for him to get here. I did send him a new link, so my TV finally arrived. So course, it would arrive as soon as I start this interview. I've been here all day waiting for it, and I was hoping that I wouldn't have interfered with this interview. I'm sure I probably pissed him off, probably not. It's like I wasn't trying to do that. Just happened to work out this way where it's just this is how it went. You know, they sent a guy with his personal van to my house, and he get the address wrong, and he went all the way to Red Lake Falls instead. I'm just like, you could have called me, you know. I could have told you where I live, but whatever. Job's been done. This is what it is, I guess. All right, all right. And here we are. Hello again,
Hey
sir.
man,
How's it going? I appreciate your patience, boy. You're a saint for being as patient as you are. So I
no
appreciate.
problem.
Uh, I just want to tell you how thrilled I am to do this interview with you. I'm sure you've done lots of interviews. I don't know a whole lot about you, but I try to learn a little bit about you. Well, after I sent you a friend request and everything, and asked you to do an interview, so well, this will be interesting to me to learn as much as I can about you and your time with Eddie Van Halen. So,
Cool, man.
all right, we'll get started here. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to this special Renegade Radio exclusive interview as we are still on as of this recording. It is Wednesday, April 3rd, 2024, and my crew and I are currently on a spring break, but because I'm the host and creator of Renegade Radio, I always like to stay busy anyway while everybody else is working and doing their thing, all the crew members. So I want to stay busy and do interviews with people that I find are interesting in the worlds of pop culture that you might know or you might not know. Maybe some of the unsung heroes of the world of pop culture. And today we have a very special guest, a guy who wrote a book about the life and times of Eddie Van Halen, or the time that he spent with Edward Van Halen, Mr. Stephen Rosen. Welcome to Renegade Radio.
Hey Sean, good to be here, man. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing wonderful. I'm doing wonderful now that we are able to do this. And man, I'm just impressed with the. I went to your Facebook page yesterday, and I was kind of looking at all the photos, and well, you know a lot of people. It seems like oh, it's just Eddie Van Halen. You've established yourself as a guru in the industry, anyway.
Yeah, man. I met one or three people these last 4.5 decades as a rock journalist. So yeah, yeah. I was lucky enough to meet some remarkable people and a bunch of my heroes and some of the greatest guitar players who ever lived. So yeah, man. It was a pretty remarkable ride for sure.
What was so special about Eddie that compared to anybody else that you've worked with?
Well, I mean, the thing that was unique with Edward is that I had this very close relationship that lasted for such a long time. I mean, there were other guitar players I'd interviewed over the years multiple times, and some of them didn't live far from me. Steve Lukather sort of lived up around the corner. This is when I was living back up in the Hollywood Hills. I now live in Orange County, California, about a half hour from Disneyland. But I lived up in Laurel Canyon, up in the Hollywood Hills, literally, I think, for about 45 years. So, Steve Lukather was somebody I met when the first Toto record came out. And, we corresponded pretty regularly. And I went up to his house a few times to do interviews. But it's not like we were, hanging out as friends, even though I would call us friends, just to, where he would come over to my place or I go over there. I really never had that relationship with anybody else. Again, I've interviewed a lot of guitar players multiple times and spent some time with them. Steve Vai I've known pretty well. Um, Billy Gibbons, I actually knew pretty well back in the day.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, what made my relationship with Edward so unique is that there was a relationship, and he just happened to be one of the most amazing guitar players, in the world at the time. So
Oh, oh,
it was
always
pretty
will be.
amazing.
Always will be, even after his death, man. I tell
Yeah,
you.
yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, he gets the acknowledgement like a Jimi Hendrix, who Jimmy has been around for over 50 years, and yet he's still relevant to this world. So why not Edward as well? You know?
That's true, and I've always looked at that kind of longevity as the real key for influence. Uh, you know, I mean, there are a lot of great guitar players out today, or guys that came out 10 years ago. And what'll be interesting is, in 30 or 40 years time, who will we be talking about? Um, I mean, it is a different world. You now have the internet. People's attention spans are shorter. People aren't listening to entire records. They're downloading a single, so it is different in that respect. But great is great. But yeah, Hendrix. Clapton. We're still talking about. Obviously, Jimmy Page hasn't played a note for 40 years, really. Um, I mean, but we still talk about those people, and certainly Edward, of course. Um,
You know who I think they'll be talking about, and it's kind of an unsung hero in his own world, even though he is known in the industry. But Joe Bonamassa,
yep,
that's one of my
he is
favorites.
he is an unbelievably talented guy. Again, I don't know if you were looking at my Facebook page. I actually interviewed Joe way back in the day, and I
Oh, okay.
immediately felt a kinship with him, man, because he loved all those bands that I loved. I mean, he loved Clapton and Blind Faith. I mean, we all loved him in Cream, but he loved Paul Kossoff, and he covered a Jethro Tull song. You name me one other artist who covers Jethro Tull, I mean, I love those bands, and he got it, So he kind of came from that classic rock thing, but he had the chop, He had those more modern chops. He was a songwriter. He was a really good singer. A lot of times, those amazing guitar players want to be singers, and they're good singers. It's workmanlike, but it's not like they're going to replace Paul Rogers anytime soon. But the
Uh,
guy's really an amazing singer. He is an incredible guitar player. He did a version of "Had to Cry Today." Was from some German gig that he did, and it's just a trio, and it is his interpretation, man, and his vocals, and it's so big sounding, and it's retro, but it's modern. He is absolutely a gifted guitar player. Not to mention, he has probably one of the most spectacular guitar collections I've ever seen. He actually lived about, and I didn't know this, he lived about literally 5 minutes from where I live, up in the Hollywood Hills. He's got this beautiful little pad up there. And I had the chance, and again, I think some of the pictures I have of him were in one of his rooms, surrounded by Les Pauls and Strats and Tellers. I mean, it's just you can't even believe what you're looking at. I mean, one pristine guitar after another, and amazing. It's funny. It's funny. This is kind of an aside. So we were talking about it, and he still collects, not as much, but he said out loud, he goes, I don't know what's going to happen with the collection. He goes, I mean, even if you wanted to sell a collection like that, I mean, you're talking about, 0.01% of the world who could afford the collection, much less one of the guitars. So, I mean,
yeah.
he was musing out loud, well, what do I do with this collection, and his advice was, don't do what I did. I mean, it's pretty funny, I mean, in some aspects, I mean, it's true. I mean, if he had kids, he could leave it to the kids, but so anyway, funny. I mean, those guitars just all may end up in a museum somewhere. But
Oh yeah, and he lives
anyway,
by
funny.
himself, so it's like you don't have no kids or nothing. He just lived the American dream, man. I tell you, he's just one of those guys that just got lucky, just had a talent, and went with it, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we're here to talk about. Well, we're here to talk about two people tonight. We're here to talk about you because I want to know all I can about you because you seem like an interesting person, no matter what. All your your road to success, and I'm sure you've had some crossroads along the way, or some, some bottom moments too, I'm
Oh
sure,
yeah.
like everybody has. But we're going to talk more about the positive moments, and also just like the connection with Edward, because you're now, is this book like new, or is it like, has it been around for a while?
Right. Well, good question, man. So I began writing the book in excuse me, 2020. And as weird as it was, I actually began writing it on August 24th, and I remember that day because it was my birthday.
Huh.
6 weeks later, Edward passed away.
Oh,
Um, so when I started the book, he was still around, and part of me wanted Edward to know about the book. Um, I write in TONECHASER. Edward wasn't a big reader, so
uh-huh.
I don't know if he ever would have read the book, but it would have been nice had he known about the book. Um, that being said, so I start the book in 2020. I finish it in, excuse me, 2021. 14 months later, I wrote every day, and that was hard. Um, um,
Sure.
and at first, I wanted to, I'm thinking, well, my God, here's this book. I've completed this book. And I'm a writer who had this friendship with Edward Van Halen, and no other writer ever had that. You know, um, there were writers who interviewed him many times, but none of them spent the kind of time I did. So I thought, excuse me, I thought publishers would come out of the woodwork and be really interested in the book. So I'm seeing, a big publishing deal, and doing big book tours, and there was no interest. And that was a little discouraging, to say the least. So I
Yeah, I
reached
would
out
say.
to yeah, man. I reached out to my buddy Neil Zlozauer. Neil, for those who don't know, was Van Halen's official photographer. I think literally from the beginning, I think up to the 1984 record. And he had come out with several photographic books, a couple on Van Halen, or maybe more than that. And so I said, hey man, you must know some publishers. Do you have any names or numbers? And if you know Neil, Neil talks to you like he wants to be talking to anybody else, and he's loud and he's in your face. But that's just Neil. So it's like, don't be an idiot. What do you mean you're looking for a publishing deal? You're not going to get any money. You're not going to do anything. I'll give you a few bucks, and you're not going to make any money. And he was right. So, I looked the other way and started looking for printers. Ultimately found a printer in China through this person I had met, Greg Trupiano. And for those who have seen the book, have nothing but praise just in terms of the look of the book. The last thing I wanted was for the book to look like it was a self-published book. And I mean, no offense to anybody else who's had their books self-published, but they always feel, the paper's not great and the graphics are kind of sketchy. And that was the last thing I wanted. But the Chinese, my God, their attention to detail, it was just fantastic. So long answer to your short question, Sean. The first edition came out in 20, was it 2021? I don't think the first edition came out because by the time I got it printed and all that, it was actually the beginning of 2022. Sold
Okay.
out of the first edition, came out with the second edition, and just got the third edition sent to me literally, I think about 2-3 weeks ago. I think March 12th. The book
Okay.
arrived in Long Beach Port from China, literally a slow boat from China. And I literally just got the books and been fulfilling all the pre-orders. So it's a new book in terms of a third edition. The text is identical to the first two. The new edition obviously has a new cover, new back cover. The blurbs on the back are different than the second edition. There's an expanded photo section. I created this little custom box for the book. So each book comes in its own little box, which is really very cool. And yeah, so yeah,
Okay.
old book, new
Okay.
book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, hey, it seems it's new to me because when I that's one of the reasons why I sent you a friend request in the first place because I love people that write books. Now I don't read a whole lot of books myself. I'm more like I like to look up information via like online and whatever, and I like to do my little type of search. And an audiobook is somewhat better, I think, because it's like I like when people read to me. I don't know why
Hmm.
that is. It's probably the weirdest thing to even say, but it's just what I like. Um, but I take pride, and especially doing these interviews and stuff, when people, like I said, unsung heroes like yourself, and I don't mean that being a put down. I just don't
Yeah.
feel enough people know about you, but maybe I could be wrong. I just don't know. But anyway, you're doing this book about an amazing individual, and I feel people need to know about it. Tone Chaser, Understanding Edward, my 26-year journey with Edward Van Halen. I mean, Tone Chaser, that's a kind of a unique title for it. When coming up with the idea for a title, how did that Tone Chaser come to mind?
I really worried a lot about the title. I wanted something great. I didn't want it to be called, I didn't want to name it after one of the songs. And I know other writers have done that. And those guys are fantastic writers and they've written great books. I just didn't want to do that. So I kept trying to, toss in my head names, and, I had one was a life this was, trying to be a little poetic and twist
Uh-huh.
things, and I said that to a couple of people and they go, what the hell does that even mean? What is that? And I go, okay, so that's not going to work. And I had a couple. I think one was um, uh, blood, frets, and tears. I think was one. I thought, it sounds like a country song or something. So I'm working on the book, and I still don't have a title. I mean, and literally, I think it was the last interview or one of the last interviews I ever did with Edward, and this is 2003, and I started interviewing Edward in 1978. So
Oh,
I've been listening to my interviews. I have all these interviews on cassette. So I'm
oh,
listening and I'm writing and I'm trying to bring back the memory and what was that day like and what did we do? And I'm listening to this one interview and I asked him something. What are you doing now? Or I can't even remember the question. It's in the book. And somehow, or maybe I said, does it still feel like it did for you back in the day? Do you still have that, that passion? And he said to me, hey man, I'm a tone chaser. I'm always looking for that elusive tone. And as soon as I heard him say that word, I go, oh my God, that's it. How perfect is that? Because we're all tone chasers, right? Every guitar player in the world is. But beyond that, every person in the world is, without trying to get too cerebral here, every person in the world is, chasing his own tones, right? Looking for happiness and fulfillment and
sure.
respect and love. I mean, so we're all looking for that in some way. And what I loved about it is that Edward never spoke like that. He would have said, "Yeah, man, I just gotta, just put a new neck on the guitar. I put a, new pickup in, and tried out a new amp, and got a cool new tone." Or, what I mean? He would never have identified himself as a tone chaser. And even to use the word elusive was was out of character. He would have said, "Yeah, man, I can't find that fucking tone. I don't know." You know what I mean? That's
Yeah.
just not the way he would talk about. For some reason, he was in this very poetic mood during this phone call. So I knew right there it was Tone Chaser, and and then understanding Edward sort of works on two levels. So it's understanding Edward like we're all trying to understand Edward, you know. But it's also a description of him understanding Edward and understanding Edward like a sympathetic Edward, you know what I mean? And then, my 26-year journey. And I toyed around with, my 26-year odyssey, my 26-year adventure. And that sounded a little too, I don't know, man. It didn't strike me. But journey, I thought, that works, because every day, you're discovering something new about him, about yourself, we're both making our way in the world. So a little bit of a long title, but you know, at the end of the day, I mean, I was pretty happy with it.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. That totally makes sense. I mean, and you know, I think what's nice about this is that when you were thinking about your titles and everything, you didn't just jump to the first one. You gave it enough time, and you waited until you had the great idea of while you even before you started writing the book. You know, just all these things that came to you. And I like the story about the cassettes because so, you know, recording, doing interviews and stuff, I can only imagine you probably had like probably a cheap microphone back in the day and whatever, and or whatever the tape recorders had, you know, built inside to do all this stuff. And I suppose that's all like part of your archive, I suppose, you know, and stuff you still have to this day.
That's exactly right. You know, when you say cheap microphone, pal, you're paying me a compliment. I mean, this thing, I don't even know where I got it. Because I mean, I know I didn't go to like Radio Shack or some big electronics store to buy a microphone. It was like, you know, in a box in the garage maybe, or
Uh-huh.
you know, we used to have rummage sales, and people would like bring over stuff, you know, and we'd store it
Yep,
in our
yep, yep.
garage.
Oh yeah.
And actually, my mom would look through the stuff, and if she found something she wanted, she'd just pull it out. You know that was her pay for allowing people to store stuff in the garage. And maybe it was in the bottom of some box, you know. And I cannot remember where I got the cassette player because again, I didn't go out and buy this thing, and it was horrible. And yeah, man, it wasn't even like it had a built-in microphone. That would have been way too hi-fi for me, man. It was, you know, you plug it in, and on any given day, yeah, man, the cap stands were wearing down, and so the cap stands, the noise will be picked up in the microphone. So
Uh-huh.
you know, I'm talking to Edward, and it'd be so Edward, hey Edward, tell me, you know, and you hear the sound of the cap stands going around. So yeah, man, but as you described, man, it's part of the archives, right? I mean, these weren't interviews done in a broadcast studio. They weren't high quality. Later on, I did get a Pro Walkman, a stereo microphone, and the recordings were better. But still, man,
Okay.
I was using cheap cassettes, and maybe I was sitting too far away from him. But they got a little better. But you know, that's what it was. And I mean, I'm lucky. I'm one of those kinds of people who tended to keep things, and you know, I stored them decently enough so they did. 40 years later, when I transferred them to CD and then to hard drives, the quality was still pretty decent. You know, so I have all that to be thankful for. But
I mean,
yeah,
like, what was the first type of cassette that you bought? Like, was it just a standard, just like a old school cassette tape?
yeah, man. I used to go to. We had a department store near us. It was called Grant's, and it was just like a precursor of a Walmart,
Oh,
only infinitely smaller. You know, I think there was like a little section that had, you know, food. And then when you walk downstairs, they had like a little music section. Remember they had
okay.
albums down there and they had
Uh-huh.
guitars and they had like, you know, like these cheap Japanese guitars now that are probably kind of hip, you know. I remember they used to sell like, you know, three cassettes, you know, in a plastic bag, you know,
I remember
60s for
that too.
like I don't know, man, 89 cents. So it's funny because I have a lot of those original cassettes. I could go look at some of the brands. I mean, they were the most off brand you could ever think. But yeah, they were just
Well,
cheap
you said that
cassettes.
you said that you digitized you did eventually digitize your archive.
I had a friend that I met, Dave Jeffries, and somehow I met him at a record swap meet, Capitol Records in Hollywood, the famous round
Yep,
building that looks like a right,
sure.
looks like a they used to have these swap meets where they would not only would they bring out like all of the Capitol records that didn't sell, like all these bands didn't sell, but you could bring records, and they still have swap meets now. And you could you could bring records and you could set up on their parking lot and sell records. And I ran into him there, and somehow he knew me, or he knew about some of the stuff I'd written. This is probably hard to remember, early 80s, maybe. And,
Okay.
and we just started talking, and I mentioned I had cassettes, and maybe he had suggested, oh, hey, I can make copies of your cassettes. So I think what he did first was he actually made cassette copies. Then he took my originals, dumped them to CDs, and then eventually, and then I took the CDs and I had another buddy, I think about 2, 3, 4 years ago, dumped a hard drive. So I now have the cassettes, CDs, and hard drives.
Oh wow.
But yeah, so yeah, but it's funny, man. When I was doing the book, I tried to work off of CDs, and that's impossible because you can't stop and start and rewind, or at least I couldn't figure it out. And the hard drive, I put it in, and you could go along and stop it, but again, to rewind was a thing. So honestly, man, I just worked from the cassettes. Just so
Oh
used to
sure.
hit stop and rewinding and
Well, I was gonna say if you did have like a big archive like you do and had a way to digitize everything, that'd be like a podcast right there. But I'm sure you're probably afraid that people would probably steal like download them illegally and where you'd probably want to charge some money or something just to hear all that stuff. Yeah.
well, Sean, a couple of people have suggested the podcast thing. One, I am the most lo-fi guy you'd ever can ever imagine. So they say,
Oh,
oh, well, all you got to do is, get your camera, get a good microphone, and do their software. And it's like, so that's one thing. I do have a YouTube channel, and there are a lot of interviews up there. And I guess if anybody wanted to take the interviews, on YouTube, it's called sharing.
yeah,
Well, maybe it is sharing. No one has ever come to me and said, hey, man, can I use your interview on my site? I would say yes, but none of them ever do that. So, there's a
oh,
fine line, I suppose, between sharing and stealing. But in this day and age, anybody can steal anything.
sure.
Um, yeah. So I don't know, man. I suppose, in my small way, my YouTube channel is about as far as I can go. And even that, I have my buddy, Adam Roach, a good friend in Australia. He edits the interviews and he puts them up there. And I have another buddy, Chris Bello, who does like the graphic and, you know,
Oh,
I mean, honestly, man, I can't figure out YouTube. I can't figure out Facebook or Instagram. I can never find like looking for your link. It's like I stumbled upon it like by accident. I don't even know how I found it. So long answer, man. Yeah, man. Podcast is above my pay grade. So
oh, because you asked me to send it to your email, but you didn't send
exactly,
me no email at all until I asked you for it. So I'm just like, oh,
exactly,
but it's all
exactly,
good. It's all good. I mean,
exactly.
what the hell?
I know.
Who cares?
I mean, I know nobody uses email anymore, man, but
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, what's that?
yeah.
Email? No, I mean, obviously you must have paid a little close attention to detail because the camera you have is pretty good on your laptop or desktop or whatever. I'm sure.
Yeah,
Did you set that
yeah,
up
it is
yourself? Or
actually.
somebody else? Did somebody set that up for you?
No, no, I figured that out. I
Oh,
figured
there
out
you
how
go.
where to plug it in and how to, I think you had to download some software or something. I mean, trust me, man. At the end of the day, I figured the whole thing would go up in a puff of smoke, and no one was more surprised than me when it worked. So,
That's okay. Hey, I want to give you a compliment because it's like you say you're a lo-fi guy, but anybody can. I think a lot of people, that's the thing. I had to teach my folks how to run a computer back in the day, and we're talking back like in the mid-90s. We had
yeah,
our very first IBM computer when we had Windows 98 and everything. Slow as hell. Stupid or not even Wi-Fi, it was dial-up. I'm sure you remember those days, and I'm just like. I try to help my entire family teach them about technology, and now look at where we're at. Everything's technology. Everything, music, movies, CGI, non-CGI, whatever. It's all technology. It's crazy how that
it is.
works.
It is absolutely, and part of it's good. I don't know, part of it's not so good, but it is what it is. For sure.
I can only imagine, and I've said this question before to other guests, but like you came up in a time period where things were just happening all the time, and it probably is true to this day too because of where you live. But like in a time where everything was just was either good or bad or whatever. Imagine having social media at those moments, you know, the 60s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, you know. Imagine, you know, oh, when, before Van Halen made their debut, they would promote their debut CD or debut album, you know, on social media, like back in the day. Imagine the hype, you know.
Yeah, man, it would have been an entirely different world, you know. And I suppose when I referenced, you know, some of it's good, some of it's bad, that's part of what I was talking about. So look, you're a musician and you want to get your music out there. You know, back in the day, basically the only recourse you had was to try to get a record deal, you know, maybe a production deal of some kind. I mean, it was tough. You know, to have a home studio was prohibitive. I mean, that gear was really expensive. Now, you know, you can do it on your phone, you know, but because you can do it so easily now, where back in the day there would be, you know, and I'm just pulling numbers out of the hat, you know, 5,000 bands a year were being signed to labels. And again, I don't know, maybe it's much more, much less. Now there are 150,000 bands, you know, putting their music out there, and you know, more power to them. They have every right to do that. But it kind of clogs up the arteries. You know, you got to really dig through a lot of stuff to find something that's good. You know, and making stuff so accessible where you would know absolutely everything that ever Van Halen ever did and every piece of gear, and you know how he was making his guitars and all of that. I don't know, man. I mean, I think that takes away some of the mystery. You know, which is why magazines, print magazines, that was the nascent period for you know, for
Sure.
rock
Right,
magazines, right? I mean, you wanted to find out about a guitar player, you bought Guitar Player magazine,
sure.
right? And you know, guys would tell me, my God, I read your story on Paul Kossoff, and my God, I didn't realize he did that, you know, and you know, where else are you going to find out about Paul Kossoff? So to me, that was pretty amazing. So I don't know, man. I suppose there's good and bad with everything, but yeah, it would have been a different world entirely.
Well, you know, that's the part that kind of pisses me off a little bit on a personal note. The fact that, you know, most of these companies now have gotten rid of the physical print and have only gone digital only. And for me, like I'm a movie collector and I'm a film watcher. I used to have a big CD collection back in the day, but I have like a lot of physical movies because I believe, you know, you should own everything that you have, you know, rather
Mhm.
than just stream it all the time. And I always enjoyed getting a physical copy of a magazine. You know, like I used to subscribe to wrestling magazines and Mad magazines and all types of stuff, and it seems like that's just like is very rare to find something that's still in print nowadays.
Very rare. I used to subscribe to Mad Magazine too, man. I could not wait for that issue to come. That was the greatest. Yeah, and people, you know, people that have never experienced that have never experienced it, so they don't understand the true joy of getting the magazine and holding it and looking at it. And again, you know, people who never grew up listening to records, you know, vinyl, you know, to try to explain to them, you know, that my God, it's the record. That's how those records were recorded. They were recorded analog by those artists. It was meant to be listened on a stereo with two speakers, not as a download, not as an MP3, not as a stream, not as a wave. You know, that's not it the way it was intended. You know, and it was something you could hold in your hand, and you listen to the entire record. You know, I know I'm sounding like an old record here, but
Oh, it's okay.
yeah,
It's
man,
okay.
it's just a different world, you know. And you talk to the musicians themselves, and you know, for them, I think a lot of it has changed, and I think a lot of them are incredibly saddened by the state of things. I mean, big bands, you know, who now, you know, they sell downloads or this and that, and you know, I'm sure for them it must be a little disheartening.
Do you think bands
So
like Metallica were kind of warning us 20 years ago about the Napster age and everything? Now that it's here,
exactly, and they yelled at those guys. They screamed at them. I think Napster was the beginning of the end, man. How they ever look? I never met the guy. Maybe I forget it. I forget his name. Maybe he's the greatest guy in the world, but he destroyed music in my mind.
sure.
You know
So
how?
you
But
don't listen to like Spotify or anything? You just always have a physical copy of something by your side? Never.
yeah, man. Yeah, I've never been a Spotify guy or Pandora. Um, I mean, I can sort of appreciate those, but again, you know, I mean, you keep reading, these monster bands, Spotify pays, I don't know what it is. These huge bands are making, $800 a month for, 8 billion downloads. So imagine
Sure.
what some new band, they're not even making enough money to buy a cup of Starbucks.
Well, but what I'm trying, what I mean though is like minus the financial bullshit. I'm just saying as a app or as a what they offer. Like what so Spotify to me offers everything. I mean, you want to find something, it's there. I'm not worried. I don't care about. Like, I get it. They screw everybody over, and that's fucked up. They shouldn't do that. But as a music lover, I would say there's a lot of content on there.
Yeah, as someone who listens to music, I mean, it probably is. I agree with you. For me, I think for me, Sirius Radio is the alternative. And I
Sure,
said to myself, there is no freaking way I'm ever going to pay for radio. But I don't know. Somehow I bought a new car, and they give you like 6 months of Sirius. I'm going,
sure.
oh my god, there are 8 classic rock stations and 15 news stations and all those sports stations. It's like, how much is that? $20 a month? I don't think so. So it's like, so for me, that's kind of my alternative. But yeah, I can see for a listener, it is all there. I mean, those libraries are vast, they're huge. So yeah, it probably makes sense. I just wish they'd, treat musicians better.
No,
Musicians are always treated that way.
I
They're always
agree. I agree with you.
you know,
But from my own personal standpoint, it helped me discover one of my favorite artists of all time, and that's a guy by the name of Greg Kihn. Greg Kihn band. Like
yeah,
he's known for a few hits on the radio,
yeah,
but yet Spotify will have everything that he's ever
yeah,
done, and I just
yeah,
like, oh, I love it. Yeah, I
yeah,
love it.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I get that. I get that.
It's like, like I understand maybe you're not a, like with radio because I used to do radio. I mean, yeah, we have Renegade Radio, but it's more like a video podcast. It's not really an audio thing or whatever, even though we can offer an audio format. But I have like 20 some years off and on of radio experience, but I've never been hired to work at a real radio station. It's kind of sad to see nowadays, and I'm sure even in California, most of the stuff is automated. They play the same shit every day. They don't. You'll hear some new stuff once in a while, but it's like a gold only station should play more than just the hits. They should play some of the deepest tracks that have been around for 50, 60 years that nobody's ever heard of, but yet they won't. Why is that?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, that's I go to Sirius, and I think one of the programs is called Deep Tracks.
Yep. Channel
So
28, I
and
believe.
even that goes deep. It goes to the second level. It doesn't go to the fourth level. But at least yeah, you're hearing stuff that you haven't heard before. But I know what you're saying.
Early
Um,
times. Early times is a great host. Like he took over for Jim Ladd, the late great Jim Ladd, and that was a guy that kind of changed the industry. I know we're kind of going on all factors here now, but that's what interviews do, I guess. When you improvise. Jim Ladd was one of those guys that really kind of changed radio history, but early times to me also does a great job. I've had him on the show before, and he's definitely a professional as far as I'm concerned.
yeah, man, very cool, very cool. Yeah, Jim Ladd was definitely one of those early guys. I remember KPPC out here was one of the first FM stations um, that I heard, and it was just unbelievable, man. I mean, the music they were playing, all the stuff that I loved, stuff that would never have been played on AM. Um, uh, yeah, different world.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, speaking of world, now let's switch topics here a little bit. I want to learn a little bit about you, and I want the audience to learn a little bit about you. What's the Steve Rosen story? Like, what was life growing up? Were you raised in California? Is this kind of like your home state?
No, I was actually born in St. Louis,
Okay.
Missouri, and my dad's brother had moved out to California, and my dad was a big football fan. So he's watching the Rose Bowl on TV, and so this is January, I think, in when the Rose Bowl,
Uh-huh.
and right, so he's these people. It's kind of sunny, all these people in shorts, and St. Louis, it's pouring down snow and it's freezing and
Sure.
it's thinking it's
Just like
great.
Minnesota.
Oh, there you go. And my mom said, Hirsch, my dad's name is Harold.
Yeah.
Hirsch, we're moving to California. So they literally, I was 6, my brother was 3, and put us in the car, and we drove literally at Route 66, and ended up in California. Not California, which where we were headed. Grew up in Culver City. Culver City was like the best kept secret on the west side of California. It was the home of all the studios. And people think all the studios were up in Hollywood. They were in Culver City, MGM and Desilu, 20th Century. They were all in Culver City. We were 5 minutes from the ocean. The weather was amazing. And probably in the last 15 or 20 years, people have rediscovered Culver City. Before you'd tell people, I'm from Culver City, and they go, well, where is that? They knew where Santa Monica was. They knew where Venice, California was, right? But they didn't know Culver City. So grew up in Culver City, went to Culver City Junior High, Culver City High School, wrote for my high school newspaper as a senior and had like a little music column. And I'd go out to clubs and review shows, and I loved doing that. Went to UCLA out of high school, and that was a nightmare. I didn't belong there. I hated it. And I write about this in TONECHASER. The English teacher, it was some creative writing class. English teacher, I was getting F's on all these papers, and he says, man, he goes, you really think you're a better writer than you are. You're never going to make it as a writer,
Jeez.
And so I remember sitting there, eating those words, and I said, fuck it. I left before the year was over. And I just started sending out, I'd go to see a show and I send out like live reviews. So I send out live reviews to Circus and Guitar Player. This is probably about 72, 73, early 73. And of course I was rejected by everybody. But Guitar Player wrote back, says, oh, well-written article, but we don't run live reviews. I felt like a moron. It's like, dude, at least find out the format of the fucking magazine before you send stuff out, So I tried to be a little more professional about it, Had a couple things printed in this little local softcore porn newspaper called the LA Star. I call it softcore porn because it was basically like one of those like newsprint, kind of fold out newspapers you get, like, you put 25 cents in the coin machine and pull it, and pull out a copy. And in the back were all the ads for the massage parlors. And that's why you were buying it, right? You weren't buying it to glean any great insight, editorial, music, creative writing by this Steve Rosen guy. But this guy, Mark Yandel, printed a couple of my reviews. I went to Europe and the UK with a buddy of mine after UCLA, and we just kind of hitchhiked around. And Mark Yandel, the music editor for the LA Star, had given me, and how he had these names, I will never know. He had like the names of these managers and publicists. And I thought, these can't be real. And he said, hey, you're going to go over there. You can be like our correspondent. Excuse me. You can write stories and send them back and we'll run them. He had the name Max Clifford on there. Max Clifford handled Joe Cocker.
Oh.
So I go to, one of the red telephone booths, and we'd been sleeping outside. So we're sleeping in Hyde Park. We get washed up in some bathroom. We're sleeping in backpacks. We go find a telephone booth, put in the pants or whatever it is, and say, hi, can I speak to Max Clifford? And he goes, yeah, hi, Max Clifford. I go, hi, Max. My name is Stephen Rosen, and I'm a music journalist, and I really haven't done anything, but I'm over here, and I'm wondering, if I could maybe interview some of your artists. He goes, yeah, come in tomorrow. You can interview Joe Cocker. First interview I ever did was with Joe Cocker. And man, it was just this magic time. I did a couple more interviews. I actually had a chance to sit in a room with other writers. Paul McCartney, this is 73. Paul McCartney was doing the Wings university tour you know, they pull up with the band and just go play at a university under some
Yeah.
pseudonym, right? So I was in a
Right.
room with McCartney and some other writers, you know, and it grew from there. I came back and you know, I had a few more things printed. I had a thing printed in the LA Free Press, which was a very hip underground newspaper at the time. I met this girl Lydia Woltag, who worked at a company called Gibson and Stromberg. They were like the first rock and roll publicity company. They sort of took me under their wing. They opened their doors to all of their artists. So I interviewed Steely Dan, a band called Black Kangaroo with Jorma Kaukonen's brother, I forget his name. Good band. Copperhead, John Cipollina from Quicksilver, an amazing undersung guitar player. Jeff Beck. Jeff Beck was and is my favorite guitar player. They said, you know, you want to interview Jeff Beck? I go, Lydia, I'll cut off a limb to interview Jeff Beck. So I'm in her office and she calls Guitar Player magazine. And I was so desperate to write for Guitar Player. I tried and tried, kept getting turned down. I'm there while she's making the call. Hi, Jim Crockett, the editor. I have this writer, Steve Rosen, and he's going to be interviewing Jeff Beck. Would you be interested? And I can hear going, yeah. She gets off the phone and she says, yeah, Jim, you know, do the interview, write the story, and just send it to him. And if he likes it, he'll run it. I go to the Continental Hyatt House. That was the famous hotel on the Sunset Strip where all the bands stayed. They call it the Continental Riot House. You probably know about that show. Because none of the hotels would allow the bands to stay there because the bands would trash the rooms. Well, the bands did trash the rooms, but the bands also paid for them, you know. So the Hyatt House welcomed them, you know. So I go, I knock on the door, and Jeff Beck opens the door, and I tell you, man, I really almost just turned and walked away because I didn't think I was capable of dealing with it. It was really a terrifying experience. So we go in, I take out my $3 microphone and my $5 cassette player, and we're talking, and he's just amazing. I knew a lot about Jeff Beck. I mean, I really knew a lot about him, you know. His earliest, the Trident stays, I mean, I had done my homework, you know. Get to the end of the tape, and I rewind it a little bit just to make sure the levels were okay, and there's nothing there. And I rewind a little more, you know, I think, oh, I didn't go far enough, you know, and there's nothing there. Jeff is watching this process. I had hit play, and I was so terrified I hadn't hit record. The whole side was blank. He looked at it. I'm thinking, my career is done. Jeff Beck is going to go yelling at the publicist at the magazine. Why'd you send this moron to interview me? He was so cool. He said, listen, let's continue. You can come back tomorrow. Anyway, I sent that story to Guitar Player. It became a cover. So the first story I ever did with them was a cover, December 73. I wrote for them for the next 5 years. I did 16 covers. There was only a total of 72 issues, an issue a month in 5 years. Was it 60? I'm sorry, 6 years, 72. So I did like a cover story, like every 6 issues was my cover. Anyway, that grew. I was writing for Cream and Circus and Musician. I was starting to write for a lot of Japanese magazines, Player, Ad Lib, Rock and F, a lot of European magazines. In the mid 80s, I was writing for Guitar World, and it just kept growing. You know, I did a lot for Ultimate Guitar, which was an online site, and it was just a springboard, man. And it was just during a time when magazines were growing up. Magazines needed freelance writers, and you know, a lot of these bands were, you know, in the 70s, a lot of these bands that we now love, they were just coming out with their first records or their second record. So, you know, I got to know the guys in ZZ Top really well, and Aerosmith, and you know, Peter Frampton. I mean, just all these acts who would later be huge. They were sort of, you know, not baby bands, but they were starting up. They needed to do interviews. So, you know, the publicist and management was pushing them. Hey, you got to go do an interview with that guy, Steve Rosen, man. He'll write a story for some German magazine. You know, we need you to do that. So, you know,
Wow.
It was pretty amazing. And that I literally did that for nearly 50 years. So.
Wow, it seems like you really have had a pretty cool life. I mean, I'm sorry for calling you an unsung hero because man, I think you're probably up there in legendary status for all the stuff that you've done because you kind of lived a life that I wanted to live, you know, because I've been doing interviews since 2006. I've interviewed a lot of cool people and everything, but nobody knows who the fuck I am.
Yeah, well, you know,
Yeah, that's
yeah, you
crazy.
just, obviously, I can tell that you loved it. I mean, I would have worked for free. I mean,
Oh,
right,
I
you're
have.
gonna put me in a room with Paul Kossoff or Bad Company or Gary Moore. You know, how much do I have to pay you to go do that interview? You know what I mean? So, I mean, of course,
Sure.
we want to make money, we want to pay bills, but it was never about that.
Sure, sure.
You
Well,
know,
that's how I feel too. Because I mean, I've always done this for free, and you know, I would love to make money and everything, but then it's like, yeah, I mean, I have my side job, so it's like it's okay, but it's I would really rather do this full time. You
yeah,
know, that'd be
yeah.
wonderful. But so with doing everything that you did, I obviously your life would have been totally different if you were staying in St. Louis, I'm sure. You probably would have just been a normal person, just oh, I'm just gonna work a 9 to 5 and whatever, you know. But who knows? I mean, was there like was that like the a place for the blues scene too, St. Louis or Missouri or somewhere around there? You could have probably
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I
got your
mean, you know,
hands
that's
on.
really, I'm sorry, Sean. Yeah, man, that's a really interesting um, idea. I've thought about that a lot. If I had stayed in St. Louis, um, yeah, St. Louis, I think it's called home of the blues. So look, St. Louis was a pretty big city, obviously.
Uh-huh.
You know, I mean, virtually every band that's touring, you know, is going to go through St. Louis. So the bands probably would have gone through St. Louis. There were radio stations. I mean, I don't think there were any magazines really based in St. Louis, but it didn't really matter. I mean, obviously, this would have been before the internet, but you know, everything was done by a phone call, and you know, I mean, I literally would type the story. I mean, I was working on a Underwood manual typewriter that belonged to my mom, so I typed the story, and you know, literally put it in the mail and mail it to the magazines. And thank goodness the story never got lost along the way because I never made copies. Because when you made a carbon copy, um, the typewriter was so old, you know, it would get too tight against the ribbon, you know, so it wouldn't move right. Anyway,
Yeah, yeah,
in
yeah.
answer to your question, I don't know, man. I mean, look, I always loved music. I loved writing. Would I have been a music journalist? God, I don't know, man. It's such an intriguing question. Yeah, would I have worked in a maybe I would have worked in a library? I always thought teaching would have been interesting. You know, back in the day, we still there was reverence for teachers. I thought maybe that would have been cool. You know, well, hell yeah, for all I know, man, you know, would have worked. Excuse me, would have worked in a bank that was lousy with numbers.
Me too.
Yeah, you
Me
know,
too.
I mean, it's not. I wasn't qualified to do anything else. I couldn't do anything with my hands. I couldn't build shit. I couldn't work on cars.
Same
You know,
here.
science was out of the question. You know, um, yeah, I think about that a lot, you know. I really do.
Oh, that's cool. Because I mean, yeah, it could have been an alternative world for you. I mean, you
Yeah.
still could have got yourself involved with media and all that. I mean, I always try to find a way to get involved no matter. I live in South Dakota for a short time, about 10 years ago, over in the Black Hills, and over there, that's a whole different world too when it comes to
Wow.
media and the way they live over there. But I live in northern Minnesota, so that's why I brought up Minnesota earlier
Yeah.
on. But my whole thing is like I made a lot of friends just like you have, and you met a lot of people that you are friends with, even like with Eddie and Edward and whatnot, and a lot of people that you know. There's one person that comes into mind that I know he's gonna be having a release party here soon for his book that he wrote. A rock and roll photographer, Michael Strider. Does that name ring a
I
bell
don't
at
know
all?
that name. I don't know that name.
Rock photographer at all? Michael
I'm
Strider?
sorry. Do I know rock photographers?
Yeah, have you ever worked with any at all? Well, I mean, you
Oh,
worked
oh,
with one for Ed, or you said for Ed,
yeah,
with
yeah. Oh,
Ellen?
I'm sorry, man. Yeah, I was referenced. Yeah, I've never heard of that photographer you mentioned, but I mean, I'm sure that there are, you know, a handful. Obviously, I don't know. Yeah. So Niels Lozauer was. I mean, Neil is a legend all his own. You know, he was. Neil had actually started shooting about 69, so he was actually shooting before I even started writing. And he became Van Halen's official photographer. I think he was there from kind of that first tour or the second tour through 1984. And Neil is somebody I eventually met. Neil actually only lived about 20 minutes from where I lived. Neil lived sort of down in West Hollywood. I lived up in the Hollywood Hills. And so our paths were crossing, and his photos were being used with my stories, and I kept seeing that name, and somehow we ran into each other or we met each other, and yeah, so I worked with Neil for years. He'd come and shoot the interviews, but yeah, there were a lot of amazing photographers back in the day. Neil Preston, who was Zeppelin's official
Had him
photographer.
on the show before too, long time
Yeah.
ago. He's
Uh,
interesting.
Richard Creamer, all these guys who were like shooting for Cream and Circus.
Oh yeah, Cream, yes. We talking Cream the band or Cream the magazine? Because I remember
Cream
the magazine too. Because there was a DVD I just got not too long ago. It talked about the whole rise and fall of Cream, even though I think they're kind of come back and all a little bit, but of the magazine anyway.
Oh yeah, no, you're right. You're right, absolutely. I've seen that. Yeah, I mean, back in the day, man, Cream was Cream and Circus were like, I mean, I so desperately wanted to write for them. So when I was able to, do my first little thing for Cream, actually, I think it might have been a Deep Purple story. And Circus, I mean, God, I just, to me, I had arrived, oh my God, I'm in Cream and Circus, How cool
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, one of the films that I know that there's a movie that we talk about unsung things or whatever. There's a movie that real Californians will know, but a lot of people have probably forgotten because it's kind of got lost in the Hollywood shuffle, as most films do. But Edward had the chance to do a lot of the instrumentals on a certain movie from 1984. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
The Wildlife?
Yeah.
Yes. How did you were with him around that time when he was doing that?
I was. It's funny, man. So I would sit down with Edward and we'd have an interview to do for Guitar World. So back, like, I think it was 84, 85, and 86, I did 3 covers with Edward for Guitar World. And those were, a lot of Van Halen fans look at those stories as being, ooh, those were pretty kind of, significant stories. And I just bring that up because, yeah, that was around the time of Wildlife. But, as a Guitar World interview, it probably, I wouldn't have brought up Wildlife film. If I brought it up, it would have been like, oh, Ed, you worked on Wildlife, what guitars were you using? Because basically those were magazines for guitar players. So in answer to your question, I think that in the book, I do ask him about Wildlife, but it's just one question amongst 100 others in an interview. And what I'm not sad, that's not the right word. What I regret is, all these years later, and the book is done, and I'm really happy with the book, and but it's like, I wish I had asked him 10 questions about Wildlife, and guys are saying, oh my God, there's that picture of you and Edward in that black and white striped guitar, and we've never seen the back of the guitar. And there's a picture with you with the rear of the guitar. And to guitar Van Halen nerds, this is like discovering the Holy Grail. And I had no idea. To me, it was just a moment in time. It was a photograph. Had I had any concept of how important that would be in the legacy of Edward Van Halen, I would have asked him, Ed, what's this guitar and why is it? You know what I mean? You just, at the time, you never think about this stuff. What I knew I did want to do, so I'm just going to backtrack just a little bit here, Sean.
Yeah.
In 1985, I was going to write Edward's authorized biography. By then, 85, the 1984 record had come out. I think this is before 5150. He was arguably the biggest guitar player in the world. And I knew that writers were going to approach him wanting to write his life story, And so I built up the nerve to say, Edward, writers are going to come to you and they're going to want to write about you. I'd like to be the person to write that book. And he said, yeah. He said, you know, definitely. I can't think of anybody else who could do it, you know. And that felt amazing. So I started working on the book, on this authorized biography. We signed simple little contracts. I started interviewing, all the people in his orbit, friends and former bandmates and, you know, girlfriends, anybody I could find that I thought had something worthwhile to say. But the one thing I wanted to do, that I had to do, is even though by 85 I had done a lot of interviews with Edward, I had never really sat down with him and done the kinds of interviews that I needed for the book, which weren't talking about his guitars or his amps or the Brown sound, was talking about, so what was it like when you were a little kid growing up in Amsterdam? And, you know, did you have a lot of friends? You know, were you popular? Did you really start smoking when you were 12? Did you really drink in the house with your dad? What was the family life like? What was school like? You know, what did you get into trouble? You know, did you have pet? You know, I mean, all that stuff that people really wanted to know about, that nobody knew about. But I could never get him to commit to sit down and do those interviews, unfortunately. So, in answer to your question, you know, about the wildlife, it just comes up as a passing thing. Had I had the chance to sit down with him, I probably would have brought up the wildlife in more depth, you know, and really gone into it.
Well, that's one of my favorite, you know, kind of unsung movies next to like Walk Like a Man and all that because I like all that B-rated stuff. But it was just because I was discovering like a lot of the characters that I knew from Back to the Future and Mask and Weird Science were all kind of combined in that whole movie. And I'm just like, and the California scene back in those days, I'm sure, you know, there had to be some type of press for it or something and then they add Edwards instrumentals. It just makes it. It was a great freaking film, you know.
You know, I remember seeing it. It was good. I think Ed kept really low key about that.
Uh-huh.
I mean, we knew that he did it, but it's not like, you know, in the marketing thing, it was wildlife music by Edward Van Halen. I mean, it was not like that at all. And in fact, they wanted him to do another song, or I forget what it was, but he didn't even want one of the songs included. Donut City. I can't remember the
I think
exact.
yeah, Donut City. That sounds about right. That's in
Yeah.
the, I
So
don't know if that's in
either
the soundtrack or not, but it's there.
yeah, that's what it was. He didn't want it on the soundtrack.
Okay.
It's in the movie, but he didn't want it in the soundtrack. So I think that he was really still. I think he wanted to keep that, you know, really low key. That's what it was. Yeah.
Well, thanks to the wonders of YouTube and stuff, I believe you can anybody that is curious about that type of song or not just a song but the movie itself, you
Yeah.
can watch the movie online, but you can also listen to his instrumental. So that's where I
Yeah.
first heard about it because I watched the first time I watched Wildlife was probably on a video VHS that was kind of shitty quality, so I didn't really get to hear everything the way it is now. They just put it on Blu-ray. They released a little
Yeah.
special edition on Blu-ray, and it looks like a
Yeah.
brand new movie. It looks so good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, anyway, there's Stephen. I really appreciate you taking the time to let me interview you. I see you got a whole lot of stuff on your walls there. Must be all your history of all the things that you've kind of done in your life. Who are those pictures with on the side there
Where
behind
over here?
on the other side? Well, yeah, I guess there too, but then on the other side here, there's like a country
Over
guy.
here?
Yeah. Well, like
Um,
down below there's a like looks like like a darker
right
guy.
here.
That must be you, I'm guessing.
I'm in all these pictures.
Okay.
So is this the one that you see here?
Yeah,
Yeah.
those two right over there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this guy is Wilbur Longmire. He was like a studio player.
Okay.
That's that's Dwayne Eddy. You know,
Oh,
the he did the
yeah.
twang
Rebel
guitar.
Rouser. Oh yeah.
Exactly. You know,
Yeah.
it's funny. Um, there's a chapter in the book. It's called Van Halen on vinyl. Um, I had a huge record collection back in the day. I mean, because all the labels would send you the records. I mean,
Uh-huh.
huge. And so Edward knew about the collection I had in like back of my bedroom. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to give Ed a bunch of records. You know, maybe he'll hear something that strikes him. Anyway, we were going through stuff, and I had some Dwayne Eddy records. And I go, yeah, Dwayne Eddy. And he goes, who? I go, Dwayne Eddy. He didn't know Dwayne Eddy, which is not surprising, but I always said that Edward knew a lot about music, but he really didn't know a lot about the history of music, which is funny. He did a lot of they did a lot of semi-obscure covers back in the day, but he didn't know Dwayne Eddy. I would later find out he didn't really know who Les Paul was.
Oh.
It's just kind of funny. You would think that he would know all those people.
Yeah.
Where am I seeing? So this is Richie Blackmore.
Okay.
That's Martin Barr from Jethro Tull.
Okay.
It's kind of out of picture here. That's White Snake. Can you see any of these? These are
I can see the first four anyway, or the five.
That's Les Paul.
Okay.
That's Johnny Winter. Okay. That's Neil Young. I never interviewed Neil Young, but I ran into him. I don't know if can you see that one?
Yep, I can see that one.
That's George Harrison. It's a press conference. I'm sitting in the back. Wow. I think I asked him one question. I was so terrified. It's like, yeah. That's the Girls from Heart. That's Groucho Marx.
Okay.
That's at a Zeppelin. Wow. That was the Zeppelin Swan Song party when Zeppelin started their own label.
You kind of have that Groucho Marx later year look kind of going on with the beret and everything. I'm talking about you. Right now, the way you're dressed.
Yeah, exactly. Can you see this one?
Yeah, I can see it. It's just small, but I can see it.
It's a topless girl. This is backstage at Van Halen 1983, I think, at the sports arena. They had two topless waitresses. I never really drank, so I kept ordering drinks from this girl. Probably spent about $900 in drinks just to have her walk by and serve me a drink.
Wow.
That's a Mick Mars.
Okay.
I don't know if you can see that. I was at the Circus Vargas, this little circus in Santa Monica, and it was kind of like the fat lady, and it just it was sad. But yeah, man, if I walked around my condo here, virtually every square inch of wall is covered with photos and backstage passes, and and I don't have them up there really so much as I'll come and look and go, oh my God, I met Mick Ronson, and I love meeting Mick Ronson, and it meant a lot to me. It's not that so much as it just is kind of, it's just kind of who I am or who I was, and and honestly, when people like you look and they go, oh, who's that? And they go, oh, that's. I mean, I love when some buddies come over and they go, who's that? And I go, oh, it's Tom Johnston from the Doobie Brothers. Go, oh, really, man? That's what it looks like. So to me, I love doing that stuff, So that's kind of why they're up.
Oh, that's awesome. No, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but for anybody that wants to know how to get the book and who haven't learned enough from this interview, how can they do so?
Yeah, man. So you can find the book on my webpage. That's very simple. TONECHASERbook.com. One word, TONECHASERbook.com. You can pre-order. I'm sorry, you can order. I have the books. I'm out of pre-order mode. Still in pre-order mode here. You can also find the book on Amazon, Reverb, eBay, and Etsy. So if you go to Etsy and you want you want to buy a homemade purse and to put your book in, you can go to Etsy and do that, Sure. If you just go to any of those sites and you type in Tone Chaser, in the main little page there, it will come to my book. And so I hope you go out and get it. And
absolutely.
Absolutely.
So I have one last question for you, and I asked this with the guy that I interviewed on Monday. So I'm going to ask this to you too. It's been a while since I've asked this question, anyway, especially to a guy involved in media like yourself. What's your legacy going to be? What do you want people to remember about you?
Wow, that's a deep one. I always thought that we all, and again, man, I'm not trying to sound like a spiritual guy, like a crystal sniffing incense. I'm not that kind of person, but I think we all bring something, if you're not out there doing terrible things to the world and hurting people, I think everybody else is just trying to do something, well, whatever it is,
Right.
and you know, to leave something behind after you go. And to me, that was always important. Some people say, hey, when I'm gone, what do I care? I don't know. I mean, obviously, you're never going to know consciously, but to me, that was always important. So, what will my legacy be? I'd like people to think that, yeah, this Steve Rosen, he interviewed a lot of famous people, and along the way, he wrote a couple good stories that I really loved, you know. And yeah, he wrote this book on Edward Van Halen, and he took a chance, and he was really honest in that book, and he didn't have to do that, and that's why I really like that book. And I don't think Stephen had to do that, and I'm glad he did it. I think those are the important things, man. If you leave behind one thing that lasts after you, I think you've done. I think you've done a great gig. Beyond that, it's who can say what your legacy is going to be? Oh God, Rosen, he was out there. He'd talk to anybody. It's like, but I hope people don't think that. I hope there's, you know, they got something from the things that I wrote. And just real quickly, um, actually, my first real true love was being a songwriter. I wanted to be a songwriter and a guitar player. I was never going to be a guitar player like any of these guys I was interviewing. I never, in any fashion, ever had that dream. And I was never going to be a songwriter's greatest thing, or Paul Simon. But I always thought I was a good songwriter, and I was a competent guitar player. So I'm hoping that maybe somewhere along the line, someone's heard of some of those songs, that ended up on little indie records or some obscure TV commercial. And goes, yeah, he was a pretty decent songwriter too. So people can think that about me. I'll be happy.
Oh, that sounds like a good answer. I mean, you and I share the same vision, kind of, because I want to be remembered for the things that I've done too, and I try to do good for the community. I don't know if I think people need to be entertained, and I think you and I do that, have done those jobs, and continue to do those jobs the best that we can. You're just in a bigger, better market than me, because
Uh,
you're in California, man, where everything's happening. So.
yeah, well, California's gone through a lot of changes too, man. I mean,
I know, but it's still California. That's
oh,
still,
it is.
people don't forget where they come from. Some people do, when they get a little too much money or power. But there are those people that say, I remember when this was like this, when this was like that, and blah 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 blah
Yeah,
blah. That's
yeah,
why a movie like Wildlife I can relate to, even though I've never been to California, because I feel kind of like that was my type of movie,
yeah,
my type of timeline, because I'm an '80s kid anyway. I was born in
yeah,
'83, so.
yeah.
So, all right. Well,
Absolutely.
I
Cool.
appreciate you, man, and thanks a lot for taking the time, because you didn't have to do all this. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Sean. I really appreciate it, man. There were some really good questions in there. Thank you.
Oh, I try. I didn't write down anything, and I barely know you, but now I feel like I've got to know you a little bit. So,
Very cool.
all right, man.
All right,
Thanks a
Sean.
lot, and thanks
See
for
you,
being
bud.
part of Renegade Radio. See you later.
See ya.